The Arizona desert was still half asleep when the first signs of disaster appeared. A lioness lay stretched across the pale grass, her breaths shallow, uneven, barely there at all. Dawn washed over her ribs in soft gold, but nothing about the scene looked peaceful. Her body trembled in weak, broken waves, as if every muscle was fighting a losing battle. Only a few feet away stood the dominant male of the territory, a massive lion with a mane so dark it looked almost black in the morning light. Researchers called him Ronan, but there was nothing king-like about him now. He wasn't roaring, patrolling, or threatening the horizon the way he usually defended his land. He was simply staring at her. Every few moments, he lowered his head to nudge her shoulder, gently, carefully, like he was afraid she'd crumble under his touch. A low, wounded rumble vibrated from his chest, a sound so soft it didn't belong to a predator. It belonged to something grieving. The lioness convulsed once, her abdomen tightening in a violent contraction that made Ronan jerk in alarm. Then, stillness. Her eyes fluttered open for a heartbeat, revealing a thin flicker of pain, then closed as if she no longer had the strength to face the world. She didn't move again. Miles away at the Desert Ridge Wildlife Center, a young technician named Cameron Hayes watched the scene unfold through a grainy, motion-triggered camera feed. At first he'd assumed the lioness was resting, but when he zoomed in, really zoomed in, his pulse spiked. Her chest rose, stopped, held, then didn't rise again. "Come on," Cameron whispered, leaning closer. "Come on. Breathe." Ronan suddenly pressed his forehead to her side, nudging with frantic urgency. The motion was so desperate Cameron's stomach twisted. This wasn't a long labor. This wasn't exhaustion. This was collapse. Cameron grabbed the emergency radio with trembling fingers. "Dispatch, this is Hayes. Lioness L-47 in the Sahara Ridge sector. Possible respiratory arrest during labor. Dominant male present. This is a code red wildlife medical." A soft hiss of static. Then Ranger Avery Quinn's calm, decisive voice cut through. "Copy that. We're moving. Keep visual." Cameron swallowed hard as he watched Ronan shift his massive body closer to the lioness. He wasn't protecting territory. He wasn't guarding a kill. He looked lost, terrified. His golden eyes kept drifting toward the empty horizon, almost as if he expected help to arrive from the wind itself. "Come on," Cameron whispered again. "Hold on." For a second, the lioness's tail twitched. Her ribs fluttered once, then stilled. Too still. Ronan lifted his head, staring into the distance, mane stirring in the growing breeze. And at that exact moment, the first rescue truck rolled out of the station miles away, dust swirling behind its tires. Cameron didn't know why, but he felt it. Something in the desert had cried out for help, and someone had finally answered. The alarm code hit the radio room like a bolt of electricity. Ranger Avery Quinn was halfway through inventory checks when Cameron's trembling voice came through the emergency channel. Even before he finished describing the lioness's stalled breathing and the dominant male's frantic behavior, Avery was already moving, grabbing her field pack, keys, and medical authorization tablet in one swift motion. "Send me the coordinates," she ordered, her voice crisp, controlled. "Alert veterinary response. This looks like obstructed labor with respiratory compromise." "Yes, sending now," Cameron replied, breathless. Within 90 seconds, the Desert Ridge Wildlife Center erupted into coordinated motion. Emergencies involving apex predators weren't just fast. They demanded precision. Every second mattered. Every mistake had consequences. Avery pushed through the garage doors as the early sun flashed against the trucks. Her team was already assembling. Dr. Rowan Pierce, the wildlife veterinarian with decades of field trauma expertise. Eli Turner, tranquilizer specialist and tracker. Jade Morales, field documentarian who recorded every rescue for training and legal oversight. Avery climbed into the driver's seat as Dr. Pierce tossed his medical crate into the back. "What do we know?" he asked. "Lioness, late-stage labor, possibly collapsing," Avery said. "Dominant male, still on scene. Cameron reports respiratory arrest for several seconds." Pierce exhaled sharply. "That's bad. Really bad." Eli climbed into the passenger seat, loading tranquilizer darts with precise movements. "What's the male doing?" "Not acting territorial. More distressed." "That's even worse," Eli murmured. "Unpredictable." The engine roared to life as Avery swung the truck toward the desert road, tires kicking up a cloud of dust. Back at the station, Cameron patched the live feed into their dashboard tablet. The image flickered. Ronan hunched over the Lioness, nudging, pleading, his mane stirred by a rising wind. Jade leaned forward, her voice softening. "He's not guarding. He's waiting." Avery tightened her grip on the wheel. "Then we can't make him wait long." The trucks barreled across the reserve's rugged terrain, bouncing over dips and ridges as the sun climbed higher. The desert blurred into streaks of red and gold, the heat already simmering despite the early hour. "Vitals?" Avery asked as Pierce studied the distant camera view. "Her sides aren't moving," he said quietly. "If she seized again, she may crash before we reach her." A silence fell over the vehicle, heavy, urgent. Avery pressed harder on the accelerator. "We're not losing her." The closer they got, the more intense the atmosphere became. The desert seemed to pull taut, as if the very landscape understood the stakes. Finally, as they crested a sandy rise, the scene came into view. Ronan stood in the open, a massive silhouette carved against the pale grasses. But instead of roaring at the approaching trucks, he stepped forward, not in aggression, but in what looked eerily like recognition. Avery slowed. "Everyone," she said quietly, "stay sharp. Lions don't behave like this unless they've run out of options." Ronan stared at them, eyes wide, chest heaving, mane trembling in the wind, as if begging the rescuers to do what he could not. Avery opened her door. "We go in," she whispered. Right now, the moment Avery stepped out of the truck, the desert fell painfully still, as though even the wind understood the weight of the moment. Ronan stood just yards away, his massive frame tense, rigid, every muscle pulled tight beneath his dark mane. But he didn't charge. He didn't roar. He didn't even lift a paw. He was waiting. Avery raised one hand slowly, palm open, a gesture meant to say, "We're not here to hurt her." The lion's golden eyes tracked every inch of her movement. Behind her, Dr. Pierce, Eli, and Jade slid out of the second truck with practiced calm, forming a staggered line as they approached the lioness's collapsed body. "Easy," Avery murmured. "Let him see what we're doing." Ronan's ears twitched. His gaze flicked between Avery and the lioness lying motionless in the dust behind him. There was terror in his eyes, raw, honest fear, and Avery had seen enough wounded animals to recognize the look of a creature who knew he was about to lose someone he couldn't protect. The lioness lay half-curled, her flanks barely moving, her breathing shallow to the point of invisibility. Dust clung to her muzzle. Her paws were splayed awkwardly in the dirt. the way they often fell when an animal no longer had the strength to control its posture. "She's in severe distress," Pierce whispered, eyes scanning her body from a distance. "Possible uterine exhaustion, maybe internal tearing." "Vitals?" Eli asked softly. "Barely there." Avery took one slow step closer. Ronan rumbled, a low vibration that rolled through the ground rather than the air. Not a warning. Not quite a threat. It was fear given a voice. Avery froze. "It's okay," she whispered. "We're here to help her." For a moment, the entire desert seemed to hold its breath. Ronan breathed out a heavy gust, sand billowing around his paws. His tail flicked once, then went still. Then, astonishingly, he stepped back. Not much, just a single stride, but it was enough to expose the lioness's full body to the rescue team. "Did he just—" Jade whispered. Pierce nodded slowly. "He's giving us space." Eli swallowed hard. "I've never seen a male do that. Not with a mate in this condition." Avery moved forward on one knee, keeping her profile low, her hands visible. She stopped just inches from the lioness. Up close, the situation looked worse, far worse than the camera had shown. The lioness's breaths were thin, rattling like wind through cracked leaves. Her abdomen tightened once, then fell limp. "Pierce," Avery said quietly. "She's fading." The vet knelt beside her, placing his stethoscope just above the lioness's ribs. His eyes darkened. "Respiration is nearly flat. Heart rate shallow. She's going into arrest." Before Avery could respond, the lioness's body shuddered violently, then went still. No rise of her chest. No twitch. Nothing. Ronan reacted instantly. He surged forward with a deep, broken cry, one that didn't sound like it belonged to any lion Avery had ever heard. His enormous paws dug into the dirt as he leaned over his mate, nudging her with devastating desperation. Eli tensed, ready to fire the tranquilizer. "Hold," Avery whispered sharply. But Ronan was spiraling, panic exploding through every nerve. He rose halfway onto his front legs, towering above the humans, pupils blown wide with grief, instinct, confusion. Avery didn't move. If she flinched, if she ran, if her team panicked, it would trigger the attack he was fighting back. She lifted her hand slowly, fingers spread open in the universal language of helplessness. "Ronan," she whispered. "Let me help her." The lion's breath hitched, his chest heaved, his eyes darted between Avery and the unmoving lioness. Then something shifted. In a moment so fragile Avery wasn't sure she was witnessing it, Ronan stepped back again, shaking, trembling, as if surrendering his last instinct in exchange for a chance to save her. "Pierce, check her airway," Avery whispered. The vet slid in immediately, placing 2 fingers against the lioness's throat. Pulse. Faint. Extremely faint. No respiratory movement. Avery exhaled through clenched teeth. "We need to stimulate breathing now." Eli crouched low. "Avery, if he changes his mind." "He won't," Avery said softly, glancing at the trembling lion. "Not now." The lioness's body gave a tiny, weak tremor beneath Pierce's hands, just enough to prove there was still something inside fighting to stay. Avery leaned over her. "Hang on, girl," she whispered, voice thick with urgency. "You're not leaving yet." Behind her, Ronan sank to the ground, his massive frame folding in defeat as he watched the humans work, his last hope, the only hope, while the desert held its breath around them. The desert seemed to tilt into silence, a silence so complete it felt unnatural. Avery could hear her own pulse thudding in her ears as she knelt over the lioness. The animal's chest stayed still, No rise, no flutter, nothing. Her head lay limp in the dust, muzzle half buried where it had fallen during the last contraction. "She's crashing," Dr. Pierce said, voice low and tense. "Avery, we're losing her." Avery steadied her breath. "Airway first. Go." She slid one hand beneath the lioness's jaw, lifting slightly to straighten the throat. Her fingers brushed warm fur, but the muscles beneath were frighteningly slack. No resistance. No reflex. "Nothing obstructing the mouth," she murmured. "But she's not pulling air." Pierce pressed his stethoscope harder against her ribs. Shallow pulse. Barely registering. A rumble shook the ground behind them. Ronan. The massive lion had risen halfway onto his front legs again, his entire body shuddering, his golden eyes, wild with panic, locked onto the unmoving form of his mate. He let out a sound that chilled Avery's blood, something between a groan and a broken roar, the sound of grief tearing itself loose. "Eli, hold position," Avery warned without looking back. "I am," Eli said, gripping the tranquilizer rifle so tightly his knuckles whitened. "But his pupils are blown. He's close to snapping." "Not unless we give him a reason." Pierce glanced at her. "We're working with seconds." Avery leaned close to the lioness's mouth, listening. Nothing. She pressed 2 fingers gently against the throat, feeling for any hint of breath. Still nothing. "Come on," she whispered. "Don't give up now." The lioness suddenly jerked, a single sharp twitch, then went entirely limp. Ronan reacted instantly. He lunged forward, paws digging trenches into the sand, mane flaring like wildfire. His teeth flashed, not at them, but at the situation, at the panic and pain ripping through his instincts. Avery threw one hand up. "Ronan, wait!" She didn't know why she shouted it like he could understand. But somehow, he did. The lion froze, trembling so violently the sand beneath him quivered. His eyes locked onto Avery's raised hand, then flicked to her face. Something passed between them, raw, fragile, desperate. Then Ronan stepped back. One step, then another. Like he was forcing himself to surrender the moment. Avery didn't waste it. "Pierce, pulse?" "Fading," the vet snapped. "We need respiratory stimulation." Avery looked to Eli. "Prepare microdose tranquilizer. She can't fight, and we can't have sudden movement if she jolts back." Eli loaded the dart with expert precision. "Ready." "Wait for my signal." Avery lowered herself until she was inches above the lioness's mouth. She placed her hands on the ribcage, careful, firm, steady. 1, 2, compress. A faint vibration buzzed under her palms. Not a breath, more like a reflexive twitch. Pierce leaned closer, eyes narrowing. Again. Avery repeated the compressions, controlled and rhythmic. The sun beat down harsher, glinting off sweat running down her temple. The lioness twitched again. Weak, inconsistent, but real. "She's responding," Pierce breathed. "Keep going." Behind them, Ronan lowered himself slowly, inch by inch, until his chest was pressed against the dirt. His entire body trembled, but he did not move closer. He watched. He waited. Hope flickered in his haunted eyes, thin but unmistakable. Avery continued compressions. "Come on, breathe, just breathe." The lioness suddenly released a tiny cough-like sigh. Barely audible, barely anything at all, but it was enough. Pierce exhaled sharply. Respiration attempt. Minimal but present. "Eli," Avery said, "now." The dart whispered through the air, landing gently against the lioness's flank. She didn't even flinch. The tranquilizer wasn't meant to sedate. It was meant to keep her still, stable, prevent her exhausted body from spasming and collapsing again. Airway open, Avery murmured, lifting the head slightly. Breathing shallow, but breathing. Pierce nodded firmly. We have her back. For now. Ronan made a sound, not a roar, not a growl, something softer, lower, a tremble of relief from a creature built to never show weakness. His mane brushed the ground as he lowered his head toward the lioness, touching her gently with his muzzle. Avery glanced up at him, chest tightening. His golden eyes shimmered with something painfully close to gratitude. She whispered, "We're not done, but we're here. We're with her." The desert wind rose again, swirling dust around them. But this time, it didn't feel like an ending. It felt like a second chance. The desert sun was climbing fast, heating the ground beneath their knees as Avery and her team worked to stabilize the lioness. Every new minute of life she clung to felt borrowed, fragile, impossible. Her breaths came in thin, rattling waves, too shallow, too uneven to sustain her for long. The tranquilizer helped keep her still, but it also meant her body had to fight even harder. "We can't transport her like this," Dr. Pierce said, pulling off his gloves and immediately reaching for a fresh pair. "Her contractions are failing, and she's losing oxygen. If we move her, we might cause a rupture or internal collapse." Avery pressed the back of her wrist against her forehead, brushing away sweat. "So we do this here." Pierce nodded grimly. "We do it here." Eli looked around the barren terrain, the cracked earth, the rising heat waves, the wind stirring sand across their equipment. In the middle of nowhere? With half a kit? Pierce didn't look up. "That's exactly why we don't waste time." Jade adjusted her camera, her voice quieter than usual. "Just tell me what to document, for the record." "For the record," Avery murmured. "We're about to perform emergency obstetrics in the worst conditions possible." Pierce spread a small tarp across the ground, laying out sterile wraps, clamps, antiseptic, a portable oxygen line, and a short surgical blade. It wasn't enough. It never would be. But sometimes survival wasn't about perfect equipment. It was about urgency, instinct, and refusing to quit. A low rumble vibrated through the desert floor. Ronan. The massive lion had moved closer again, only 10 feet away now, his eyes locked onto every tool, every motion, his breaths coming in heavy bursts. A single roar from him could end the entire operation, but Avery sensed he wasn't there to stop them. He was there because he couldn't leave her. "Keep him in your periphery," Avery said, voice steady but soft. "No sudden movements." Ronan's tail brushed the sand. His paws flexed, but he stayed where he was. Pierce knelt beside the lioness and examined her abdomen, pressing along the lower curve where contractions should have been strongest. Instead of rhythmic tension, there was only a swollen, unresponsive heaviness. "There's an obstruction," he said. "Her uterus isn't releasing anything. Something's blocking the canal." "Can you feel what it is?" Avery asked. Pierce shook his head. "Not without opening." Avery met his eyes. "Do it." He drew a breath, sanitized the area, then made a small, shallow incision. Not enough to expose organs, just enough to relieve pressure and identify the problem. Jade turned away for a moment, overwhelmed despite herself. "Sorry, I'm fine, keep going." Eli steadied the oxygen mask against the lioness's muzzle. Her saturation's dropping again. "Hold it steady," Pierce said, working with careful, measured movements. "We're running out of time." The moment he adjusted the incision area, something shifted beneath the skin, a rigid, unnatural bulge pushing outward. Pierce's brows knit. "There," he said. "I've got it. That's the obstruction." "What is it?" Avery asked, leaning closer without getting in the way. "A twisted mass of tissue," Pierce said, "like a compressed membrane cluster. It's been cutting off the entire passage. Can you free it?" "I can try." He slid his fingers delicately beneath the mass, loosening the pressure bit by bit. The lioness twitched weakly, just enough to show she still felt the world on some level. A deep vibration rolled from Ronan's chest. Avery lifted a calming hand. "Easy, he's helping her. Let him work." Ronan lowered himself again, his belly nearly touching the earth, his eyes full of a helplessness that struck Avery like a punch. After several tense seconds, Pierce eased the obstruction free. A thick, swollen bundle slid out, intact, but clearly what had been killing her. "That's it," he breathed. "That was the blockage." Jade let out a choked exhale. "That thing was inside her?" "It nearly cost her everything," Pierce said. Avery looked at the lioness. "Is the pressure releasing?" Pierce pressed gently along her abdomen. "Yes. Her contraction reflex might return, if her body hasn't fully shut down." "Meaning?" "Meaning we wait to see if she responds." Eli adjusted the oxygen again. Her breathing just improved. Slightly. Then, in a moment so small Avery almost missed it, the lioness's abdomen twitched. A contraction, weak but real. Pierce leaned closer, watching with a surgeon's intensity. "That's a good sign. Come on, girl, give me another." Another twitch. Then a soft tightening. Her body, exhausted and beaten, still found a way to fight. "She's trying," Avery whispered. "She's actually trying." Ronan rose to his feet, sensing the shift. His mane lifted in the wind, his entire posture transforming from despair to cautious hope. He took a slow step forward, just one, his breath trembling from the force of what he was witnessing. "We're not done yet," Pierce said, preparing the next set of tools. "She won't be able to deliver on her own. We'll have to extract the cubs manually." Avery nodded, voice calm, resolute. "Then let's bring them into the world." Behind them, Ronan stood like a sentinel, fear, hope, and love bound into one silent, trembling presence, as the desert watched a fight for life that refused to end. The desert heat pressed down like a weight as Dr. Pierce prepared for the most delicate part of the rescue. The obstruction was gone, but the lioness's body was a battlefield, exhausted, trembling, fighting to hang on. Her breaths came in thin, uneven waves beneath the oxygen mask. Each one felt like a gamble. "We're moving into extraction," Pierce said, his voice steady but threaded with urgency. "Avery, I need you at the abdomen. Eli, keep her sedation balanced. If she jolts, even once, we could lose her." Avery positioned herself at the lioness's side, hands steady despite the pounding of her heart. Jade knelt opposite her, holding the reflector so the morning sun illuminated the surgical area without blinding anyone. "Just tell me where you need light," Jade said, voice trembling. "Right there," Pierce replied. "Hold it steady." Ronan hovered only a few yards away, massive and motionless. His golden eyes followed every tiny adjustment of every tool. His muscles were coiled, not to attack, but from fear, a fear so deep it shook him, like the wind shook the thin grasses around him. The king of the territory was utterly powerless, and he knew it. Pierce worked carefully, easing the incision open just enough to access the birth canal. "Okay. I see pressure returning. A contraction should hit soon." As if responding to his voice, the lioness's abdomen tightened. Not strong, but enough to push a soft, weak tremor through her body. "That's it," Avery whispered. "Come on, sweetheart. Help us out." A second contraction fluttered through, then a third. Faint, but rhythmic. Pierce leaned in, eyes narrowing. "Something's moving." Jade gasped softly. "Is it?" "Not yet." Pierce guided gently with one hand while supporting the lioness's abdomen with the other. "We need to help her along." Minutes felt like hours. Sweat traced slow lines down Avery's temples. Eli monitored the oxygen mask, his focus razor sharp. "We're getting closer," Pierce murmured. "Avery, steady pressure right there." Avery pressed carefully where he indicated. The lioness twitched in response. Pierce inhaled. "Okay, I've got something." A small, wet shape squeezed into view, limp, fragile, frighteningly still. A cub, but it didn't cry, didn't kick, didn't move at all. Pierce eased the newborn fully into his hands. The tiny creature was pale, slick with birth fluids, its limbs dangling like loose threads. The desert seemed to fall silent again, the world narrowing around that single, unmoving body. Jade clamped a hand over her mouth. "Oh no, oh no." Avery felt her chest clench. "Pulse?" Pierce pressed 2 fingers against the cub's tiny chest, his brows furrowed. "Faint. Very faint. No breath." Avery didn't hesitate. "Give him to me." Pierce passed the cub into her palms. It was impossibly small, lighter than a glove, weaker than a whisper. Avery cupped the tiny body gently, cradling it close without blocking its airway. "Come on, little guy," she murmured. "You're not done yet." Cameron, still watching from the monitoring room miles away, whispered into the radio. "Please, please let him breathe." Avery tilted the cub slightly, supporting its tiny head with one finger. She brushed her thumb along its chest, then began gentle compressions, small enough not to injure, just enough to remind the body what it was supposed to do. 1, 2, breathe. 1, 2, breathe. Nothing. Ronan's breath hitched audibly behind them. The giant lion took a step forward, his shadow falling across them, his eyes wide with heartbreak. Eli nearly raised the tranquilizer rifle. "Avery!" "Hold," she said sharply. "He knows." She continued compressions, her own breath trembling as she worked. "Come on," she whispered again, voice tight, emotional. "Don't quit, not after everything." 10 seconds passed, 15, 20. Then, a faint, fragile squeak, so small it could have been a breeze, so soft it barely existed at all. But it was a sound. Avery's breath broke into a shaky laugh. "There it is! There you are!" The cub twitched, just a tiny spasm of life, but it was real. The next breath came with a faint squeal. Another, then another. Ronan jerked upright, ears snapping toward the tiny cry. His mane bristled, his entire body trembled as if the earth had just shifted beneath him. Pierce wiped sweat from his brow. He's alive, weak, but alive. Avery held the cub close to her chest, shielding him from the wind. "Welcome to the world, little fighter." Jade sniffled, brushing tears away quickly. I actually can't believe that worked." Pierce checked the lioness again. "Her vitals are holding, barely, but we still have more cubs to deliver." Avery looked at the tiny newborn curled in her hands. A soft, silvery sheen clung to his damp fur, so faint it seemed like a trick of the light. She whispered, "This one's special. I can feel it." Behind them, Ronan lowered his head, releasing a trembling, breathy rumble. Not a roar, not a call, but something like a father's first fragile sigh of hope. And for the first time since dawn, the desert didn't feel like a place of dying. It felt like a place of miracles. The tiny cub's first cries still lingered in the air when Avery realized how dangerously quiet the mother had become again. Her breaths were shallow, thin ribbons of air barely reaching her lungs. Even with the obstruction removed and the first cub delivered, the lioness was balancing on the edge of collapse. Pierce rechecked her vitals. "She's stable enough to move," he said, though his voice held more worry than confidence. "But she's hanging on by threads. If the transport is rough, we could lose her." Avery nodded. "Then we don't make it rough." Eli and Jade prepared the stretcher, unfolding its reinforced frame and laying a thermal blanket across it. The desert wind picked up, throwing warm gusts across the clearing. Dust swirled around the lioness's paws, rising in thin clouds that made Jade cover her mouth. "Careful," Avery said. "Let's keep her air clean." Ronan shifted again, and all three rescuers froze. The huge lion stood only a few feet from them now, far closer than any wild male should ever be. His posture wasn't aggressive, but it was full of tension, coiled tight and trembling. His amber eyes moved from the lioness to the cub in Avery's hands, then back again. "He's not going to like us lifting her," Eli murmured. Avery breathed out slowly. "He doesn't have a choice." But when she turned toward Ronan, she saw something that made her chest tighten, fear, raw and primal, shining in the golden depths of his eyes. Not fear of them, fear of losing her. "Ronan," she said quietly, "we have to take her now. If she stays here, she won't survive." The lion's ears twitched. His tail swept once across the sand. He breathed sharply, like the air hurt going in, and then he did something none of them expected. He lowered his head, not in defeat, not in submission, in permission. "Move," Avery whispered to her team, "before he changes his mind." They worked quickly but gently, sliding the stretcher beneath the lioness's limp body. Pierce supported her head, adjusting the oxygen mask so it stayed snug. Eli lifted her hindquarters while Avery steadied her abdomen, mindful of the fragile incision. When the lioness finally rested on the stretcher, Ronan let out a soft groan, a sound full of worry and helplessness. Jade swallowed. "He looks like he thinks we're taking her away forever." Avery shook her head. "He'll understand." They loaded the lioness into the back of the rescue truck. Jade climbed inside with her, holding the reflector steady so Pierce could monitor her breathing. Avery cradled the pale cub, still slightly damp, still trembling, against a heated cloth as she climbed into the passenger seat. The engine started with a low hum. The moment the vehicles began to roll, Ronan reacted. He stepped forward, one massive stride, then another, following directly behind the truck carrying the lioness. His paws landed heavily on the sand, kicking up plumes of dust with each urgent step. His tail lifted, his mane rippled in the wind, but he didn't roar or charge. He simply followed. "Is he walking with us?" Jade whispered through the radio. Avery turned in her seat, eyes widening. "He's escorting her." Eli, driving the second truck, murmured, "I've never seen anything like that, not even in documented prides." The convoy moved slowly, no faster than a gentle crawl over the uneven terrain. Every dip or ridge made the lioness's breathing stutter, and Pierce would call out adjustments as Jade held the oxygen steady. Behind them, Ronan never faltered. When the trucks picked up speed over a smoother patch, Ronan trotted, muscles rippling beneath his dark mane. When they slowed near rocky ground, he slowed too. His eyes stayed locked on the vehicle carrying his mate, like he knew each bump, each sway, each breath mattered. The sun climbed higher, painting the desert in a harsh golden glare. Heat waves shimmered off the sand. Sweat rolled down Avery's temples. The cub stirred weakly, pressing its tiny head against her palm. "Hang on, little guy," she whispered. "We're almost there." Finally, after what felt like hours, they reached the paved road leading to the main highway. The vehicles slowed to a stop. Avery opened her door, stepping out onto the asphalt. Ronan stopped in the dirt just before the pavement, where desert ended and unfamiliar terrain began. He took one tentative step forward, pressed a paw onto the edge of the road, then pulled back sharply. The heat, the texture, the instinct. He couldn't go farther. But he didn't turn away. He stood there, chest heaving, eyes burning with a devotion so intense it made Avery's throat tighten. He lowered his head, almost like a silent bow. Avery whispered, "We'll take it from here. I promise." The trucks pulled onto the road and accelerated toward the rehabilitation center. Through the rear window, they watched Ronan grow smaller, a golden figure etched against the endless desert. Still watching, still waiting, still hoping. By the time the rescue convoy reached the Arizona Wildlife Rehabilitation Center, night had swept across the desert, folding the world in cool shades of blue. The building glowed softly against the darkness, a beacon in the vast emptiness. Avery carried the tiny cub against her chest as the team rushed the stretcher inside. "Room 1, ICU, Dr. Pierce instructed. Move. She's fading." The Lioness was transferred onto a padded recovery bed, warm, sterile, surrounded by soft lighting designed to calm stressed animals. Her breathing still trembled on a thin thread. A technician adjusted the oxygen mask. Another wrapped warming blankets around her abdomen. Avery placed the newborn cub into a small incubator, adjusting the heating element so the temperature held exact. Jade hovered nearby, exhausted but alert. Her camera lowered for the first time all day. "He's still breathing," Jade murmured, eyes softening as she watched his tiny chest rise and fall. "Barely, but he's doing it." Pierce checked the vitals on the Lioness. "She's stabilizing, slowly. She's not out of danger, but she's fighting." Eli leaned against the wall for a moment, wiping sand and sweat from his face. "We still have the other cubs to deliver." The room fell into a tense hush. Everyone knew the first cub barely survived. The others, still inside a mother too weak to push, might not stand a chance without careful intervention. Pierce rolled up his sleeves. "Avery, I'll need your hands again." The next two cubs were extracted under controlled sedation. Both were tiny, but far stronger than the first. Their cries rang out sharp and high, echoing off the sterile walls. Jade let out a shaky laugh. "That's the best sound I've heard all day." The cubs were cleaned, dried, and placed beside their tiny sibling inside the incubator. 3 fragile lives huddled together in a bright, heated glow. 3 small sparks against the darkness they had nearly never entered. But the first cub, he was different. Avery lifted him again for feeding. As she held him beneath the warm light, she noticed something strange. A faint shimmer across his coat. Subtle, not bright, but unmistakable. His fur carried a pale, silvery hue, like frost catching the first morning sun. "Look," she whispered. Jade leaned in. "Is that normal?" Pierce shook his head. "Not common. Some cubs are born lighter, But this tone, this early, rare, very rare. The newborn twitched in Avery's hand, releasing a soft squeak. His tiny claws flexed, barely the size of grains of rice. He survived something he shouldn't have, Avery murmured, brushing a thumb across his head. He earned that shine. She glanced around the room, then whispered with a small smile, "Silver, that's his name." The cub let out another tiny sound, as if acknowledging her. Silver, a name born from survival. By early morning, the lioness's breathing had deepened. Her tail twitched weakly, a sign of returning reflex. When two of the stronger cubs were placed near her belly, she stirred, releasing a soft rumble. It was faint, but it was a mother's call. Avery felt her chest tighten. She recognizes them. Silver, however, remained inside the incubator. Too weak, too small. But he watched, or seemed to. Every time Avery carried him near the glass window overlooking the reserve boundary, he would lift his head and emit a tiny cry. Pierce noticed it first. What's he reacting to? Avery followed the cub's gaze. Her breath caught. Outside the tall perimeter fence, standing in the dim glow of dawn, was Ronan. He wasn't pacing. He wasn't roaring. He simply stood there, massive, silent, unwavering, his amber eyes fixed on the facility walls as if he could see straight through them. He came back, Jade whispered. Every morning that week, Ronan returned at sunrise. Never close enough to threaten, never far enough to forget. He waited at the same spot each day, watching, head low, tail brushing the sand. Silver responded each time. The tiny cub, still weaker than his siblings, would push himself upright, struggling but determined, squeaking toward the window. Sometimes he reached out with a trembling paw. Other times he simply stared toward the light. "He knows," Avery murmured, holding the cub gently. "Somehow, he knows his father is out there." And with each sunrise, Silver grew stronger. His breaths steadied, his limbs firmed, his pale coat shimmered just a little brighter beneath the heat lamps. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was coming alive. The days that followed settled into a rhythm, quiet, steady, and strangely full of anticipation. The rehabilitation center woke before sunrise, but Avery found herself rising even earlier, drawn to the tall boundary fence that overlooked the desert. She wasn't the only one. At first light each morning, as the horizon blushed with pale orange, a familiar shape emerged from the dunes. Ronan. The massive lion appeared the same way every time. Silent, deliberate, unhurried. He would walk to the exact same patch of ground where the fence ended and the desert began, lower himself into the sand, and simply wait. No roaring, no pacing, no aggression, just unwavering presence. Avery always watched from a distance, leaning against the cool metal of the fence. There was something hauntingly pure about his vigil. He wasn't there out of instinct. He wasn't guarding territory. He wasn't searching for food. He was waiting for his family. Inside the ICU room, tiny Silver somehow sensed it too. The cub, still the smallest of the three, would stir the moment Ronan appeared outside. His ears perked, his little nose twitched, and he lifted his head with surprising determination. Sometimes he squeaked, soft but intent. Other times he reached toward the window with a frail paw, as if trying to bridge the distance between them. "He reacts only when Ronan's here," Jade whispered one morning, watching the cub struggle upright. "It's like he recognizes him." Pierce nodded, adjusting the incubator settings. "Bonding runs deeper than scent. Sometimes it's instinct. Sometimes it's something else entirely. Meanwhile, the lioness grew stronger. Each day, she walked a little farther in her enclosure, nudged her robust cubs a little more firmly, and rumbled with increasing clarity. She wasn't fully recovered yet, but the spark in her eyes had returned, a mother reclaiming her place in the world. But Silver remained tethered to the incubator, fighting his own slow battle. He was improving, but he wasn't ready to join his siblings. Not yet. Avery often carried him gently to the window, letting him rest against her palm as he gazed at the distant figure outside the fence. "See him out there?" she whispered. "He hasn't missed a single morning." Silver nuzzled her thumb, then looked out again. His pale fur shimmered softly in the dawn light. Ronan lifted his head whenever he sensed movement. His amber eyes locked onto the window, onto Silver, even though logic said he couldn't possibly see such a tiny shape from so far away. But somehow, Avery felt he did. Two silhouettes, one giant, one barely bigger than her hand, connected across distance, across fear, across survival. And in those quiet mornings, Avery understood something profound. Silver wasn't holding on for himself. He was holding on because his father was waiting. The morning the team decided the lioness was finally strong enough to return home arrived with a softness that felt almost sacred. The desert sky was washed in muted lavender, the horizon glowing as though welcoming life back into a world that had nearly lost it. Avery stood beside the release enclosure, hands gripping the metal latch, watching the lioness take slow, deliberate steps across the sand. She was still thin, still healing, but the strength in her posture was unmistakable. The strength of a mother who had fought her way back from the edge. Her two larger cubs tumbled around her feet, bold and playful, batting at her tail and each other. Silver, still noticeably smaller, stayed close to her chest, blinking in the early sunlight. "You ready for this?" Pierce asked softly. Avery nodded. "They belong out there. And he's waiting." As if summoned, Ronan's silhouette appeared over a distant rise. Massive, quiet, steady. The morning sun caught his dark mane, turning it into a halo of gold-tipped shadows. He didn't roar. He didn't charge. He simply stood there, breath rising in slow clouds, watching the enclosure with the patience of a guardian who had waited far too long. Jade lowered her camera. "Some moments shouldn't be filmed," she said, her voice tight. "Some moments should just be felt." Avery drew a deep breath and lifted the latch. The gate swung open with a soft, metallic sigh. Dust drifted around the lioness's paws as she stepped into the open desert, her muscles tense with instinct and memory. The two stronger cubs bounded out first, their tiny legs stumbling over each other in chaotic excitement. But Silver paused at the threshold. He turned back toward Avery, his pale coat catching the dawn light with that faint, silvery shimmer that had given him his name. He let out a tiny cry, a soft, high sound that pierced Avery deeper than she expected. "You're ready," she whispered, brushing a finger across his head. "Go on, little one." Silver blinked once, then turned toward the open world and toddled after his siblings. Across the stretch of open ground, Ronan shifted. His chest expanded with a deep inhale. Every muscle in his body buzzed with tension. The lioness froze for a heartbeat, staring across the distance at him. The desert held its breath. Then she rumbled, a low, soft call that vibrated through the sand. Ronan answered with a sound so deep it was felt more than heard. They moved toward each other, slow at first. then faster. The distance closed in a few solemn strides. When they met, Ronan lowered his enormous head and pressed his muzzle gently against hers. No dominance, no territorial flair, just warmth, relief, a reunion sealed in absolute silence. Avery felt her throat tighten. She'd rescued dozens of animals, but she had never witnessed anything like this. "Look at them," Jade whispered. "That's love. Whatever their version of love is, that's it." Ronan turned to the two larger cubs next. They approached him fearlessly, batting clumsy paws at his feet. He sniffed them, nudged them, accepted them. The lioness circled behind him, touching her nose to their backs in reassurance. Then Silver stepped forward, the smallest, the weakest, the one who should not have survived. Ronan froze. He lowered his massive head until his nose hovered barely an inch above the tiny cub. Silver squeaked, pressing his forehead gently against his father's muzzle. The gesture was impossibly tender, too deliberate to be instinct, too pure to be taught. Avery covered her mouth. "He knows," she whispered. "Ronan knows exactly which one almost didn't make it." Pierce nodded, his voice rough. He's acknowledging him, accepting him. Silver lifted a trembling paw and placed it at the bridge of Ronan's nose as if claiming him in return. The lioness rumbled softly, circling her cubs, nudging them closer to their father. Together, mother, father, 3 cubs, they turned toward the dunes, moving as one. The family slowly walked into the wide, golden desert. Ronan led, the lioness beside him, the cubs scrambling behind them. 2 bold, 1 fragile but determined. Their shadows stretched long across the sand until the heat shimmer swallowed them whole, blending them into the horizon like a painting fading at the edges. Avery stood silently, her chest full and aching. "We didn't just save a life," she said softly. "We saved a family." Jade wiped at her eyes. "And that little one, Silver, he's going to be something special." Pierce nodded. "You can feel it." Avery watched the last hint of their silhouettes disappear into the desert light. Silver's steps had been tiny, fragile, unsteady, but he walked with the heart of a survivor. And he walked home. The desert had swallowed the lion family's silhouettes, but their presence lingered long after they vanished from sight. Avery stood at the release site long enough for the morning sun to warm the sand beneath her boots. The air was silent. No cries, no wind, no movement. Yet it felt full, as though the world itself was taking a breath after hours of holding it. Pierce stepped beside her, folding his arms as he watched the empty horizon. "It never gets old," he murmured. Jade nodded softly. "Seeing them return, it feels bigger than just rescue work." Avery didn't answer right away. She was thinking of Silver, tiny, pale, impossibly fragile, moving across the sand with steps that shouldn't have belonged to a survivor. She thought of Ronan waiting every morning, silent and unwavering. She thought of the lioness, fighting through pain that would have ended lesser creatures. "It reminds you why you don't quit," Avery finally whispered. "Why you show up, even on the hardest days." Pierce let out a slow breath. "Some lives you save. They save something in you, too." Inside the rescue truck behind them sat an empty incubator, still warm from the cub who no longer needed it. Jade picked it up gently, almost reverently. "Think he'll make it?" she asked. Avery smiled faintly. He already did. They packed up the equipment, closed the gates, and began the slow drive back to the facility. But Avery looked out the window one last time. She imagined the lioness guiding her cubs deeper into the dunes, showing them the wild world that would shape them. She pictured Ronan walking beside them, steady, protective, no longer waiting, but leading. Silver would grow up never remembering the hands that saved him, the lights of the ICU, or the incubator that warmed him. But Avery liked to imagine he might remember something else, some faint echo of the mornings he lifted his tiny head just to squeak toward the father who never left. Some bonds, she believed, were written into the world long before breath ever touched a newborn body. And some stories weren't just about survival. They were about connection, about devotion, about hope that refuses to die. Avery closed her eyes for a moment, letting the desert wind sweep across her face. Then she whispered into the quiet. Sometimes what comes into the world isn't just a life. It's a reminder of why compassion matters. And somewhere out there, beneath the rising sun, a tiny silver cub walked beside his family, alive, strong, and ready for the world.